This episode is supported by Bike Pittsburgh. You heard it here first. Their signature summer event, Open Streets Pittsburgh, is back for 2025. If you've never been before, Open Streets Pittsburgh is this incredible event where the streets in specific neighborhoods get shut down to cars so that bikers and rollerbladers and pedestrians can all take over the road. It's one of my favorite summer activities. I love seeing the way people can build the sense of community connection when the streets become car-free. And you get to experience the city from a whole new perspective, strolling or skipping or even dancing down streets that are normally dominated by cars. This year, Open Streets Pittsburgh is happening on Sunday, June 29th and Sunday, July 27th. You can stay tuned for updates at openstreetspgh.org or follow OpenStreetsPGH on Instagram.
CityCast Pittsburgh is supported today by the Heinz History Center and their newest exhibition, Pittsburgh's Hidden History. It is a cornucopia of curiosity, a magical menagerie of memory, and a little bit of this and that. There are flowery couches, relics from Kennywood, even a collection of shivs. If you listen to this show a lot, you know we are loving this. It is truly mind-boggling to see how the curators brought together such a wide range of rarely seen artifacts to tell Pittsburgh stories like never before. To buy your tickets and learn more, visit HeinzHistoryCenter.org. Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, there are a lot of questions right now about U.S. Senator John Fetterman, whether he's doing okay and whether he's fit for office. I'm with CityCast Mallory Falk to talk about what we do and don't know about the senator's well-being right now as he continues to represent Pennsylvania. It's Monday, May 19th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. Hi, Mallory.
Hey, Megan. So I know that a lot of the focus right now is on local politics. We have a primary election coming up tomorrow. But today we're going to focus on our U.S. Senator.
Yeah, I mean, a few weeks ago, we did a crossover episode with our friends over at CityCast Philly all about John Fetterman and how he has seemingly upset a lot of his constituents lately. He's made comments about immigration, comments about Gaza and Israel, defending Donald Trump, which I just think has kind of thrown people a little bit.
Yeah, people are definitely questioning his overall coziness with Trump and willingness to work with Trump. Reminder that Fetterman was the first Democrat to visit Mar-a-Lago after Trump's reelection. But yeah, there have been a lot of questions around his very hardcore stance on Israel, ways that he has seemingly shifted on immigration policy. And some people have wondered whether or how much this all has to do with the stroke that he had back in 2022, which was, of course, right before he won the Democratic primary.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard from a lot of y'all since we ran that first episode about how what we talked about resonated with you. Just to read one, Amy G said, quote, "Thanks for the deep dive about why so many of us are unhappy. We appreciate you." I only share that because I think it's important to acknowledge when there's something happening that everyone's just sort of looking around at each other and being like, you see this too, right? Is this weird? Mm-hmm. I think this might be weird. So we just wanted to recap a few things that have happened since we did that first show.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that got a lot of attention recently was when Fetterman said that the Trump administration should stop negotiating with Iran and, quote, waste that shit. He was talking to the Washington Free Beacon, and he said that Trump should, stop trying to talk to Iran and strike their nuclear facilities instead. He said, quote, "You're never going to be able to negotiate with that kind of regime that has been destabilizing the region for decades. And now we have an incredible window, I believe, to do that, to strike and destroy." And of course, he's made sort of extreme comments about unleashing violence on other people as well that, has been alarming to many.
And I mean, all of that is coming in addition to new reporting that has come out in the last few weeks that paints I would say, a much more bleak picture, certainly a lot more detailed. So it all started with this article by Ben Terrace in New York Magazine, where he talked to current and former Fetterman staffers, including people who had resigned allegedly over Fetterman's behavior, saying that they no longer recognized the man they once knew and that they had real concerns about his health. I think we should point out, too, Terrace had interviewed Fetterman before, years ago, when he was in Braddock, and the two kind of connected. Like, Fetterman told him at the time, like, oh, you actually get me. Thank you. So they started from a good place. But I'm gathering through the course of this reporting that maybe isn't true anymore.
Yeah. And he did do a sit down with Terrace for this, big in-depth New York Magazine profile. We'll get into that in a moment here. But so the way the article starts, it starts with the fact that, Fetterman, when he was campaigning, had this stroke, and then he was actually hospitalized for clinical depression not very long after he took office.
Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman is being treated at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center for clinical depression after being evaluated by the attending physician of the U.S. Congress Monday, then checking himself in Wednesday night. His office said in a statement, while John has experienced depression off and on throughout his life, it only became severe in recent weeks. His wife Gisele tweeted, "I'm so proud of him for asking for help and getting the care he needs."
So he leaves with a treatment plan. It sounds like people were feeling pretty positive about it. Sounds like it was working. But then, according to this New York Magazine reporting, his behavior starts becoming more erratic. Staffers start to worry that he's maybe not following his treatment plan. Maybe he had even gone off his medication.
Yeah. And then what this reporting revealed is that his former chief of staff, who was really a main source for this New York Magazine story, he sent a letter about all of these concerns about Fetterman going off of his treatment plan to Fetterman's care provider at Walter Reed, the hospital where he'd been treated for depression. He sent this letter back in March of 2024. This is one of the things that was striking to me about the article, is that it sounds like there have been concerns for a while now. This isn't something new. One of the details that stood out to me from this article is that allegedly staffers won't get into the car with Fetterman because his driving is so erratic. He was in a crash with his wife Gisele in the car as well. And it sounds like that's one of the big red flags that was being raised, when you have people who aren't even willing to get in the car with you. That's pretty scary. But a key takeaway from the article, I'm just going to quote here because I think it really sums it up. Former and current staffers paint a picture of an erratic senator who has become almost impossible to work for and whose mental health situation is more serious and complicated than previously reported. No one is saying every controversial position, for example, his respectful relationship with Trump, stems from his mental health, but it's become harder for them to tell which ones do.
And the article goes into deeper depth, cites several examples during and before this period where Fetterman allegedly had some really strange behaviors, walking out into traffic and things like that. Kind of jumping to now, I think one of the big questions here in Pittsburgh is just how in line with all of this his wife Gisele maybe is, because she is truly accomplished in her own right, founded multiple nonprofits. She's been an outspoken critic of Trump, a really vocal advocate for LGBTQ folks and new arrivals to America, just like she once was. I mean, according to this New York Magazine reporting, she has also been upset with John. So one staffer talked about how the two of them got in an argument in his office around Fetterman's stance on Israel. She said, quote, "They are bombing refugee camps. How can you support this?" End quote. A former staffer recalled hearing her on the speakerphone once saying to Fetterman, so this is a separate incident, quote, "Who did I marry? Where is the man that I married?" End quote. Now, this was all allegedly happening in late 2023. And this is around the same time that I noticed, and I went back and checked because I just wanted to check my memory. She stops posting with him, with John Fetterman. She always had this really tongue-in-cheek way of talking about their relationship. She posted all these pictures where his head's cut off because he's much taller than her. But you see her whole outfit, which when asked about it once, she said is because she wanted to be able to see her shoes in the photo. So she would cut off Zhao is, the name that she used for him. It would cut off his head. And it was really funny and endearing. And all of that stuff just sort of stops around this period. And I think it's totally fine to remove your family maybe from your social personas or just take a break or whatever. But she keeps posting about her family and their children. but he sort of disappears. So I think it's made a lot of people wonder, and certainly I've gotten this in my inbox, is like, should we be reading into this? Like, does this mean that she's not on board with what he's doing? It's just hard to tell.
You mentioned social, Megan, and one of the things in this story is that part of Fetterman's recovery plan was to stay off of social media, something it sounds like his staffers tried hard to prevent him from violating.
Which is really challenging for any politician in the modern era to not be on it. And maybe that was why. Like, truly, maybe like she just stopped posting him because that was part of the treatment plan and she didn't even want to tempt him.
Yeah, I mean, it also sounds like staffers were really concerned with what he would say specifically around Israel and Gaza if he could get back into his account. But, so this story at least paints a portrait that Gisele, is not on board with some of Fetterman's stances, has real concerns. But it's not super straightforward because, she did release a statement to New York Magazine for the story and suggested that Fetterman's former chief of staff, the guy that I said, was the main source for the story that sent that letter to Fetterman's care provider, that this guy was part of a conspiracy to damage her husband's reputation. She said he had been feeding her, quote, scary, untrue stories about John's health. And she also said that, quote, any alleged concerns heard from me came straight from those lies, not from John's doctors or my own eyes. So I think there's kind of a discrepancy between like how she's presented in the article by the other people around them and her own statement on things.
Yeah. And I mean, for his part, Fetterman told the reporter in that sit down that they later had, Terrace, he said that, his health is better than ever, that the people raising these concerns are just disgruntled employees, former employees.
Yeah, so then, of course, this story drops. It gets a lot of attention. And here's what Fetterman had to say to a reporter from NBC News right after the story published.
It's a one-source story with a couple anonymous sources. Hit piece from a very left publication. There's really nothing more to say about that.
I actually listened to an interview with Terrace on the podcast Today Explained, and unsurprisingly, he took issue with that characterization of his piece. He said he talked to a lot of people for the story and went through a ton of documentation, that this wasn't just relying on like one person's perspective on all of this.
Hey, Pittsburgh. Today's show is sponsored by Pittsburgh Pride. It is back. It is bigger. It is bolder. It is gayer than ever before. Get ready for a full week of love, liberation, and celebration across the city with Pittsburgh Pride 2025. It all kicks off Sunday, May 25th with the Bigger, Gayer Picnic. Think sunshine, chosen family, and all the queer joy you can pack into one Pittsburgh park. Then on Friday, May 30th, put on your formal or your fiercest. It's the Pittsburgh Pride Prom, followed by the legendary Emerald City Kiki Ball. Yes, the ballroom scene is turning out. Saturday, May 31st, brings the Pittsburgh Pride Festival Day 1 with a free concert featuring Vienna Vienna and American Idol alum David Archuleta, lighting up the night at 7 p.m. And finally, if you can handle it, Sunday, June 1st, come march with your community in the Pittsburgh Pride Parade. Then stick around for the festival Day 2, closing everything out with another free concert starring Jay Howell and the iconic Lil Mo. For all the events, all of the info, head over to PittsburghPride.com to plan your perfect Pittsburgh Pride weekend. That's PittsburghPride.com. Come as you are, show up proud, and we will see you there.
Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
So we have this bombshell New York Magazine piece that Fetterman does not appreciate. But not long after it drops, more reporting starts to come out about his behavior and well-being. The Associated Press reports that the day before that story published, the New York Magazine story came out, that Fetterman was meeting with representatives from a Pennsylvania teachers union. So that's the largest union in our state, the Pennsylvania State Educators Association, PSEA. He was in a meeting with them and essentially had an outburst, started repeating himself and shouting, "Why is everybody mad at me? Why does everybody hate me? What did I ever do?" Slamming his hands on a desk. A staff member apparently ended up having to end the meeting and move everyone out into the hall, where the staff member started crying, and teachers, being teachers, apparently comforted her. Like, they comforted Fetterman's staffer.
Yeah, teachers always stepping in when they're needed. The Philadelphia Inquirer also published a story with concerns from former Fetterman staffers. And one thing to note here, we keep saying former staffers, like a lot of staffers have left his office.
Yeah, it sounds like the retention rate is not great. I genuinely have no idea how big a sitting senator's staff is, like, and what's a normal churn rate. Like, I'm assuming there's a lot of young people, but also a lot of very experienced people, and I don't know who's staying and who's going.
Yeah, and it does sound like many of the people who've left are because of concerns around his behavior, concerns around some of the positions he's taking. But yeah, some of them talked to this reporter at the Inquirer, Julia Taruso, who was on our previous episode about Fetterman. One of the most jarring details that stood out to me from this was the way a couple staffers described Fetterman's reaction to that plane crash that happened in Philly earlier this year. If you remember, there was a medical transport plane that crashed into a residential neighborhood and 8 people ended up dying. And they said that he reacted like unusually apathetically to this crash. One staffer said, quote, "A plane went down in the middle of the street and he basically shrugged it off and could not understand why people would be freaking out." End quote. And the Inquirer article also talks about how Fetterman has just missed a bunch of votes this year. He has the 3rd worst record in the Senate.
Attendance record for voting.
Yeah. And it does note that, few of those votes were close ones. None were votes where his would be the deciding factor. But still, he isn't really there. And just also his former staffers say like his schedule's pretty sparse, and there's just this overall sense of he's not really doing the tasks that you are required to do when you are a U.S. senator.
And so the hits keep coming. As all of this is breaking, folks reach out to people in Braddock because they know him well. He was the mayor of Braddock here close to Pittsburgh from 2006 to 2019, like a good long time. He still has a residence there where at least Gisele and the kids, I think, seem to spend a lot of time. She still posts from the neighborhood a lot with the kids in the background. But some Braddock people told the Union magazine Payday Report that Fetterman was always kind of like this. So I'm going to pull some details. Some of this is from Payday. Some of it's from other reporting where folks have reached out to Braddock. And so Braddock people are saying that they feel like he's always kind of done things to advance his career, like didn't necessarily collaborate with other people, just sort of did what he wanted autonomously, which, like, you're the mayor, I guess, as long as it's like on the up and up, you can do that. They pointed out that some projects he started when he got to Braddock and when he served as mayor aren't around anymore, or they're struggling now, like lacking his leadership. And also that he was never as progressive as at least national media presented him as. There was a story in Payday Report where a lifelong Braddock resident said he never really understood why Fetterman got so much support in the first place. Quote, "I see no difference in the way John behaves now than when he was the mayor of Braddock," end quote.
Yeah, and I do remember that when Fetterman was running in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senator, there were people who said, like, I don't understand where this progressive label is coming from. Is it just because he has tattoos? Like, it doesn't fully line up with all of his views. And, even his stance on Israel, he's talked about supporting Israel in the past, though I think people feel like it's gotten, like, a lot more extreme since October 7th.
A lot more extreme. And I think he's made it, like, uniquely among senators, at least, his issue. Like, it's not just that he feels this way. He tells you he feels this way all the time.
Yeah, and there are definitely questionable moments from Fetterman's past, before the stroke. Like, something that has been brought up again and again was this incident in 2013 when he was mayor of Braddock and ended up pulling a gun on a black man and chasing him. He thought that he'd heard shots and thought that this guy was somehow involved, and it turned out that this guy was a jogger who was just out for a run, and the sound he'd heard was fireworks. And there was a lot of questioning of, like, why was your instinct to grab a gun and run after a black man? So it's not like he had this kind of spotless record up until he had the stroke, up until he suffered depression, up until he, potentially shifted off of his treatment plan. But I would also say it does sound like there is probably something cognitively that is going on with him. If you do have people around him, including, at least according to this reporting, his own wife saying that they don't recognize him. And Obviously, somebody changing after a medical incident, a medical emergency, is really sad. But also, he has one of the most powerful positions in the country right now, and his statements, his votes have real consequences. And so I think these questions about his ability to serve right now are real ones.
Yeah, and I mean, I think regardless of your read on these individual incidents, he and his staff also have to realize that people here in Western Pennsylvania, I mean, the whole state, the voters are to some extent feeling betrayed. Now, maybe they should have never put this mantle on him, but like it or not, they did. And there have been calls now for him to talk about this, to defend himself, to hold public town halls. People want to meet with this man and judge for themselves, like, are you full of it? Are you a good representative for what we want our ideals to be here in Pennsylvania? Maybe that would help calm all of this. Honestly, maybe it would make it so much worse. I don't know, but I know it's got to be in the back of the minds of his staff right now.
Yeah. And, we've talked about this on the show before. He was actually supposed to come to Pittsburgh somewhat recently. He and Pennsylvania's other senator, Republican Dave McCormick, they were going to give this talk about a book that McCormick and his wife had written, but it was a ticketed, paid event, which people were upset about that, that's not a town hall. There were plans to protest the event, and they ultimately ended up canceling it. They said, I think, for logistical reasons, ? But anyway, I believe that this state farm show was kind of like the last time he was out and about in public in a setting where constituents could interact with him.
Yeah, and I think people would like to see him more. Meanwhile, Gisele and their children are still over in Braddock. She still shows up for her firefighter shifts. She posts about that all the time. It's like a firefighter suit, but then her heels lying on the ground next to them. And she just published her own book, actually, about crying. Those are her words. So it makes you wonder over and over again, where is John? Where's John, and is he okay?
Yeah, because if you are a sitting senator, you should be meeting with your constituents. You should be a visible member of your community, and you need to show up for the votes, too. The New York Magazine reporter that we mentioned earlier, Ben Terrace, he actually spoke about Fetterman's just overall place in the Democratic Party and in the Senate right now, too. So this is from that podcast that I mentioned before, Today Explained.
He has said that he is committed to finishing out his term. There doesn't seem to be a lot of movement from Democratic leadership to push him out. Why would they? I mean, he's one of theirs. And Republicans aren't pushing him out because they don't believe in cancel culture. And, there's that. And also Fetterman is sort of a Democratic figure that has become popular on the right. He's a regular fixture on Fox, and Republicans have actually come to his defense, in some ways even more vociferously than Democrats. So I'm not so sure they will be losing him. But if they were to, it could leave kind of a vacuum in the Democratic Party for that type of Democrat, the type of kind of heterodox Democrat who's willing to punch left, who may lose a lot of support from the base, but may find a new audience who could become Democratic, the kind of Democratic senator who can go on Joe Rogan and chop it up with him, or who can appeal to these kind of rundown Braddock-like towns all across America. I mean, he does have a kind of appeal that a lot of Democrats lack. And so losing him could be a loss in that way.
And as for just how his constituents, his voters feel about all of this, a story dropped in Politico a little over a week ago now. They obtained this poll that was done actually before the New York Magazine story came out, before we've been getting these details about these questions around Fetterman's health.
And his staffers and all of that stuff.
Yeah. And so even before that dropped, this poll found that Fetterman's popularity is sinking specifically with Democratic voters here in Pittsburgh. So 49% of the Democratic voters that they surveyed said they have an unfavorable impression of Fetterman. 46% said they have a favorable impression. And just as a point of comparison, in that poll, only 13% of people said they had an unfavorable view of our governor, Josh Shapiro, and 82% view him favorably. So 49% versus 82%. That's pretty dramatic. This Politico article did give the caveat that this is just one poll, and it runs counter to some other public surveys about Fetterman's popularity right now. But that polling still did shock some Pennsylvania Democrats. And I think there are just a lot of open questions right now about Fetterman's future.
Yeah, and I mean some of the takeaways that I've seen, at least like resonating on social, is less about like 49 to 46 favorable to unfavorable, like doesn't feel that stark, but like in this larger moment where Republicans rule so much of our nation and to some degree our state, it is much more stark than it may seem on its face, that like Democrats have to rally around the ones that they do have in office, and that may not be true right now here in Pittsburgh, at least as it relates to him.
Yeah. And I mean, usually the wisdom is you're more popular where you come from, where people know you, than you might be somewhere else. So the fact that this is looking at Pittsburgh voters, I think, is pretty telling.
Yeah, and either way, it's not going to have an immediate impact. Fetterman is not up for re-election again until 2028. A ton could happen between now and then, but this is one we're definitely going to keep watching. That is all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. Thank you to our newest neighbor, John D. If you want to join the club and come to our next members-only event, head over to membership.citycast.fm. We will be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. We'll talk to you soon.
I'm very sorry for all of my stumbles on that.